Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, desolators, peasants, vassals, meat sacks, people who think I'm a dick. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to go back and talk about Kurdistan because last week, January 22nd, 2016 to be exact, President Barzani of the Iraqi Kurdistan Autonomous Region claims the era of the Sykes-Picot Act is over and a new international agreement is needed for the Middle East. And that's a very telling statement, particularly because it's the 100th anniversary this year of the Sykes-Picot Act. So going all the way back to 1916, and this is when the Allies in the post World War I era, or during the World War I era, and the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire, came this arbitrary creation of these borders in the region that have led to nothing but strife since then because they overlap all these sectarian and religious regions. And it was part of the plan at the time. Colonial powers used this technique to divide and conquer and to continue to hold people down and oppressed. Of course, they can just divide it up into different countries and different regions to be ruled and dissipate their power that they might have if they continue to have a unified country. Kurdistan being a good example. And of course, background history, Kurdistan had a country briefly when the Ottoman Empire first was dismantling. I believe it was sometime in the early 20s. There was actually a Kurdistan for several months, and maybe longer than that. But anyway, the point being that this has been a long dream of the Kurds. They are the largest group of disenfranchised and scattered peoples in the world at this point. And Barzani has chosen this moment because, of course, the chaos in the region has made these dreams become revitalized, and a lot of interesting geopolitical events happen and military events in that region that are contributing to the continued discussion of an independent Kurdistan. And so Barzani points out that the international community has started to accept that Iraq and Syria would never again be unified, and that seems like a pretty safe bet, particularly as these conflicts go on. As we know, the Kurdish region in Iraq has been autonomous for some time and has developed its own nation by all intents and purposes. And the longer the war goes on in Syria, the longer the Kurds in that part of the region will also solidify. They've all pretty much have created the foundation for a brand new country in that region in Kurdish Syria now. So this is all very pointed and very relevant. So let's look at what Barzani has said. He said, quote, "I think that within themselves world leaders have come to this conclusion that the era of Sykes-Picot is over. Whether they say it or not, accept it or not, the reality on the ground is that. But as you know, diplomats are conservatives and they give their assessment in the late stages of things, and sometimes they can't even keep up with developments," unquote. And then he says very definitely, quote, "Independence was closer than at any other time," unquote. So that is very true. And so let's look at what he says. He acknowledges that everyone knows that it's inevitable. The reality on the ground is that. And they can try and negotiate their way around it, but things are getting more set in stone as time goes on, as I pointed out earlier. And so whether they come out and say it or whether they even accept it, all the players in the region are knowing that it's inevitable, more or less. Barzani goes on to say, quote, "It's illogical to continue or insist on repeating a wrong experiment that was repeated for 100 years and is leading now here. Right now, Iraq is divided. We are not responsible for it. On the contrary, we have done our best to preserve Iraqi unity," unquote. That's very true as well. One can't really say that the Kurds haven't attempted to work with whatever kind of arrangement the United States and the government in Baghdad wanted to come up with, but certainly they have been looking out for themselves and have been operating in the field, certainly in their own best interests, taking the long vaunted area of old Kurdistan, the Kirkuk region, which is now under Kurdish control and is reunited with Kurdistan, more or less. And that's something that the Baghdad government has been at odds with and will continue to be at odds with. But that's something I've talked about before and we'll talk about again. So Barzani pushed for independence before, back in July 2014, but the momentum was lost as events unfolded in Iraq and Syria with ISIS, which of course has made Iraqi Kurdistan and the other Kurdish regions basically solidify their efforts to deal with this new factor in that region, being ISIS. So both having to defend their homeland in Syria and defend their homeland in Iraq, as well as develop their own foundations for a new nation state, or at least certainly more autonomy in a future Syria and more autonomy in the future Iraq. But I tend to agree with Barzani. I think the time has come. And he goes on to say, quote, "We have not discussed this with Turkey, whether they are going to accept this or not. I don't think they would oppose it. This is our national right. We are not a threat to anyone, but we don't ask permission to exercise our national rights," unquote. So I think that's very telling as well. He's probably correct in the sense that Turkey certainly doesn't have too much problem with an independent Kurdistan. Turkey has a lot of economic ties and basically has Kurdistan somewhat of a vassal state now. Turkey has obviously gotten wealth through their arrangement of getting Kurdish oil, which goes through Turkey, and also ISIS oil, which goes through Turkey. So anyway, but it is a point. So we'll see, because the way that Kurdistan would become independent could be a process, in which case it gives all the different actors in the region a chance to develop their own strategy, or it may be something that just happens dramatically. And considering the way things unfold in that region, one could bet that things could unfold dramatically, and that a declaration of independence is just issued at the right moment, the right place at the right time. But the map of northern Iraq has changed dramatically. Like I say, the Kurds now have Kirkuk and Sinjar, and 1,000 miles of land they didn't have before, which is now part of Kurdistan. And they will eventually be some kind of showdown, because everything's more or less broken down between Baghdad and Kurdistan. We'll have to see how this upcoming assault on Mosul goes, because it's supposed to be the Kurds from the north and the Iraqis from the south. And that could still work. They'll probably have independent commands. Undoubtedly, they'll have independent commands that will just be coordinated by the United States. But that's not a sign that they're necessarily working together. And then we have the associated events in Syria and the associated events in Turkey, because we know that should independent Kurdistan be declared in northern Iraq, it could make things certainly more complicated. One way it could make things less complicated is if it became a focal point for disenfranchised Kurds to move from Syria and from Turkey and to move into the new state of Kurdistan. Or it could be an opportunity with the dismantling of Syria, a possibility that this other region in Syria, but also the Kurds in Syria are considerably different than the Kurds in Iraqi Kurdistan, so there could be some issues there for those countries or that region of Syria joining with Kurdistan and Iraq. And the same thing goes with Turkey. The issues become far, far more problematic, but it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be some confrontation and some more volatility in that region should a Kurdistan be declared. But one has to say that Kurdistan certainly has a lot of rights, and there are other historical precedents, including for some reason the need to create a state of Israel for disenfranchised Jews. But Armenia had a long wait to get their country back, and now we have Kurdistan wanting to exercise its rights to actually just have the country that it already occupies, and they wouldn't be disenfranchising any of the native population there. So it's quite a bit different, but needless to say, there's a lot of reasons why an independent Kurdistan makes a lot of sense, seems like a historical inevitability, and Barzani is putting it back on the table. Good for him. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.